Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, the Senate is holding a marathon series of votes on the big, beautiful bill. Republicans can afford to lose only 3 votes to pass a reconciliation bill, and 2 GOP senators are firmly opposing it. NTD's Luis Martinez brings us the latest from Capitol Hill. The White House tells NTD that Canada caved to President Trump by dropping its digital services tax. Iris Tao has the latest on that and why Trump is visiting Florida's Alligator Alcatraz Detention Center. Harvard put on notice by the Trump administration. A government task force says the Ivy League school violated the civil rights of Jewish students. Jason Blair reports. In the Middle East, Israel says they are taking steps to make aid distribution centers safer for residents in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, Israel's government spokesman calls out the media for reporting casualty figures provided by Hamas. Jason Perry reports. The suspect who allegedly ambushed and killed 2 firefighters in Idaho appears to have shot himself. Details on the suspect and the current status of the investigation.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. The Senate began its Vote-A-Rama on the final text of the reconciliation bill. At least 2 Senate Republicans remain firm opponents of the bill. Our Washington correspondent, Luis Eduardo Martinez, has more on the story.
Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of H.R. 1, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 107, H.R. 1, an act to provide for reconciliation pursuant to Title II of H. Res. 14.
And so at 9 a.m. Monday morning, the Vote-A-Rama to debate the one big, beautiful bill and dozens of amendments to it began.
We have never, ever done anything to reform and improve and strengthen these programs that are growing at an unsustainable rate that will wreck our economy and wreck our country, to make sure that the people who are supposed to benefit from Medicaid do, and that it doesn't go to people who shouldn't benefit from Medicaid.
The reconciliation bill saves approximately $800 billion in Medicaid spending, mainly by requiring beneficiaries 19 to 64 years old who are able-bodied to either work, study, or volunteer at least 20 hours a week to be eligible.
Senate Republicans have to decide: choose the American people or bow down to Donald Trump and his coterie of billionaires. Because this bill, as we have said for months, steals people's health care, jacks up their electricity bill, takes away their jobs, all to pay for tax breaks for billionaires.
Despite Democrats' opposition, the one big, beautiful bill eliminates taxes on tips and overtime, which benefits working-class Americans. It expands tax deductions for small businesses. It also enhances the child tax credit and increases the state and local deductions cap to $40,000 for those earning less than $500,000 a year.
If you want higher taxes, which apparently they do, this bill is your nightmare because we're going to keep tax cuts low. If you think Washington should control spending, this is a good bill for you. If you think the government is running just perfectly and nothing can be changed, this is your nightmare.
At least 2 Republican senators out of the 53 are against the bill as it stands.
Now, Republicans are about to make a mistake on health care.
I don't make it personal at all. I like the president, supported the president. In fact, I'm for the tax cuts. I am for a lot of the bill. They could get my vote, and I could vote for the package if they take out the debt ceiling and vote on that separately.
Final vote on the bill is expected later tonight, and Vice President J.D. Vance could potentially be the tie-breaking vote if necessary. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
As the Senate holds a marathon vote on the big, beautiful bill, President Trump doubles down on keeping America safe by commemorating the opening of a Florida detention facility known as Alligator Alcatraz. Trump also secures a win from Canada amid trade tensions. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. What is the latest from the White House today?
Good evening to you as well, Tiff. The White House is touting another major win by President Trump as Canada is now dropping a so-called digital services tax just days after President Trump told Canada that it's now halting all trade talks with the country because of the tax, which he called egregious. President Trump says the tax would hurt American tech companies like Google and Amazon. And the White House today told me that today the announcement will be a big victory for American tech companies, and it shows that President Trump knows how to negotiate. Watch.
Go ahead, Alice. Canada says it's now dropping its digital services tax on American tech companies days after President Trump says he's halting all trade talks with Canada. First, what's the president's reaction to this? Can you tell us more about his call with Prime Minister Carney over the weekend? How did he get Carney to drop it?
Prime Minister Carney in Canada caved to President Trump in the United States of America. And President Trump knows how to negotiate. And it was a mistake for Canada to vow to implement that tax that would have hurt our tech companies here in the United States.
And the White House is also pushing for the passage of the big, beautiful bill. And as part of the push, President Trump tomorrow will be visiting Florida to attend the opening ceremony for a new illegal immigrant detention center called Alligator Alcatraz. And that is the center expected to hold up to 5,000 beds. Here's Caroline Levitt talking about it today. Watch.
As for why the president is going, I think his trip to this detention facility actually underscores the need to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill, because we need more detention facilities across the country. The last administration let in nearly 20 million illegal people from all over the world, and this administration is focused on arresting and detaining them.
And Border Czar Tom Homan today told me at the White House that Trump's trip tomorrow highlights the need for passing the Big Beautiful Bill, as it underscores the need for resources on the ground. For example, like in Florida. Here's what he told me. Watch.
What message it sends and how it relates to administration's push right now with the Big Beautiful Bill.
We're going to be out doing our job. We're going to be doing our job. We're going to arrest every public safety threat, national security threat we can find. And when we do that, we need a bed. Governor DeSantis is coming forth with a couple thousand beds. I applaud him for doing it.
And tomorrow, President Trump will be joined by Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, as well as Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, as well as local and state officials. Back to you.
All right, Iris, thanks for those updates. The Trump administration has formally notified Harvard University that the school failed to protect Jewish students, putting its federal funding at risk. The notice comes following a probe by the administration's task force to combat anti-Semitism. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more.
The federal government's multi-agency task force to combat anti-Semitism has informed Harvard University that it violated the civil rights of Jewish students. In a letter to Harvard President Alan Garber, the task force says, after a thorough investigation, HHS Office for Civil Rights finds that Harvard University is in violent violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin. The letter continues that the investigation found Harvard to be, quote, deliberately indifferent in some cases, and in others a, quote, willful participant in anti-Semitic harassment of Jewish students, faculty, and staff. Toward the end, the letter says, failure to institute adequate changes immediately will result in the loss of all federal financial resources and continue to affect Harvard's relationship with the federal government. White House Press Secretary Caroline Levitt told NTD that the investigation found that the majority of Jewish students at Harvard reported negative bias or discrimination on campus.
While a quarter of Jewish students at Harvard felt physically unsafe, Jewish and Israeli students were assaulted and spit on. They hid their kippahs for fear of being harassed and concealed their Jewish identity from classmates.
In response to the letter, Harvard spokesperson Jason Newton says, in responding to the government's investigation, Harvard not only shared its comprehensive and retrospective anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias report, but also outlined the ways that it has strengthened policies, disciplined those who violate them, encouraged civil discourse, and promoted open, respectful dialogue. Harvard is far from indifferent on this issue and strongly disagrees with the government's findings. The task force to combat anti-Semitism was created in February in compliance with President Trump's executive order titled Additional Measures to Combat Anti-Semitism. The task force consists of the Department of Justice, the Department of Health, the Department of Education, and the General Services Administration. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
In the Middle East, another shooting has reportedly taken place at one of the new aid distribution centers. Some people are blaming Israel for the shooting, while Israel blames Hamas. Israel is now announcing new plans to make it safer for residents to get the food. NTD's Jason Perry has the details and a warning. This report contains footage that some viewers may find disturbing.
On Monday, Israel said that more than 2 million meals are being delivered every day to residents in the Gaza Strip. However, residents expressed concern over reports of shootings around the aid sites. One resident said this after another reported shooting near an aid site in the territory.
How do you call it aid and then you shoot at people's children? Where's the world? Where are the people? You tell me. There is aid, and it's documented. Then why do you kill us?
Other media outlets have cited reports from the Gaza Health Ministry alleging that Israeli forces have shot and killed people waiting for food, but neglect to report that the Gaza Health Ministry is run by the Hamas terrorist organization. On Monday, Israel's government spokesman said this to a reporter who cited a figure on the total number of civilian casualties in the war in the Gaza Strip.
This is a Hamas figure. It is a Hamas figure, whether it's from the Gazan Health Ministry, which is Hamas, or whether it's from the civil guard of Gaza, which is Hamas.
And he said he couldn't imagine the figures from any other terrorist organization being considered authoritative.
As this conflict continues, especially at this point, Hamas will come up with more and more outrageous claims.
And the Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, was asked whether it was true that Israeli troops were ordered to kill people waiting for food.
Is that true or not true? Absolutely not true. On the contrary, we're taking efforts in order to guarantee the security of the perimeter and push Hamas away from those areas. Hamas is trying to make those areas not safe for people to come in.
And on the same day, Israeli forces said they had taken multiple steps, including reorganizing and opening new access routes to the aid distribution centers to enable the safe and efficient passage of Gaza civilians. Meanwhile, as the ceasefire between Israel and Iran continues to hold, Iran says they won't allow inspectors to visit their nuclear sites.
How are we supposed to be able to guarantee the safety and security of IAEA inspectors, while our peaceful nuclear facilities have been attacked last Monday, just 5 or 6 days ago?
On the other hand, President Trump posted on Truth Social that the U.S. is not speaking with Iran since, quote, we totally obliterated their nuclear facilities. Jason Perry, NTD News.
President Trump signed an executive order today removing sanctions on Syria. Meanwhile, the State Department sanctions members of the British punk rap band Bob Dylan for leading inflammatory chants against Israel. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
And this is in an effort to promote and support the country's path to stability and peace.
President Trump on Monday signs an executive order to remove sanctions on Syria to allow their economy to prosper. These sanctions, like asset freezes, trade and travel restrictions, were implemented over 20 years ago, and they targeted terrorists and human rights abusers. But since Syria had a regime change recently, the U.S. sees this as a new beginning for that country that has promise for a bright future. But the sanctions on the previous Assad regime and his cronies will remain under the executive order.
This is, again, an action that the president promised and shocked the world with in Saudi Arabia because he's committed to supporting a Syria that is stable, unified, and at peace with itself and its neighbors. The president met with Syria's new president when we were in the Middle East, as you know.
The U.S. has designated Syria as a state sponsor of terrorism since 1979. The executive order does not remove that designation, but U.S. officials say it is under review. There's also talk about the U.S. working to get Syria to sign on to the Abraham Accords, which would open up diplomatic relations with Israel, but there's no concrete plans announced yet. Meanwhile, the State Department disbanded its Middle East task force on Friday. It was recently formed to ensure the safety of Americans living in the Middle East amid heightened tensions. 16 flights departed Israel with over 650 U.S. citizens, permanent residents, and their accompanying family members. That's as some U.S. embassy staffers in Baghdad are also returning to work. They were ordered to evacuate on June 12th, just before Israel struck Iran. The State Department is also revoking visas of members of the British punk rap band Bob Villain. The band members led chants that included death to Israel's military. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau called the chants a hateful tirade. He said, quote, "Foreigners who glorify violence and hatred are not welcome visitors to our country."
This was a very public event that violated, as you've seen from the Deputy Secretary's tweet, that very basic standard about the nature of who we want to let into the country. That's all right.
Bob Villain was scheduled to tour in the U.S. in November, starting in Spokane, Washington. Obviously, their plans have changed. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Amid an increase of Russian attacks on Ukraine, the State Department defends President Trump's handling of the war. And Ukraine is now on track to allow the use of controversial anti-personnel mines. NTD's international correspondent Ariane Pozdar has the latest.
The president is the one person who's been able to bring everyone to the table, who's willing to talk to everyone.
The State Department on Monday defending President Trump's handling of the Russia-Ukraine war. That's as Moscow is stepping up attacks. At least 2 people are reported dead and 20 injured in different attacks in Ukraine over the weekend. Russia reportedly used hundreds of drones and missiles to hit areas across Ukraine. The State Department says Trump has recently made clear that he's still working toward peace in Ukraine.
His frustration and lack of acceptance of the attacks that have gone on in Ukraine by Russia, and that it has to stop.
Meanwhile, Ukraine is on track to withdraw from the Ottawa Convention. The agreement bans the production and use of anti-personnel mines. President Volodymyr Zelensky signed a decree for withdrawal on Sunday. He explained the decision afterwards.
Russia was never part of this convention, and it is using anti-personnel mines with utmost cynicism.
Russia has used anti-personnel mines extensively in parts of Ukraine where its forces have been operating. Ukraine's parliament still has to approve the move to withdraw from the Ottawa Convention. As opposed to anti-tank mines, anti-personnel mines can be triggered very easily, but they're still very destructive. A major problem is that after a conflict ends, those mines are usually not being picked back up. According to the Red Cross, civilians suffer the most because of anti-personnel mines. Stepping on a mine will often injure or kill 1 or more people, frequently children, with lifelong consequences for the victims and their families. Mine contamination makes it impossible to use vast areas of land, compromising food production and destroying livelihoods. Russian forces in eastern Ukraine are currently struggling to demine an area which is only 35 yards wide and 10 miles long. A soldier says some mines are homemade and thus unstable. Others have a magnetic field to detect people.
They can't be approached because they have a magnetic field. Because of this, it is difficult for our fighters to approach them and do their work.
Among other things, troops are using drones and robots to scan areas for mines. Ariane Pozdar, NTD News.
And we have new details in a developing story. A suspect who allegedly ambushed and killed 2 firefighters in Idaho appears to have shot himself. Officials believe 20-year-old Wes Rowley started a fire on Sunday to lure first responders to his trap.
Rowley was found to be in possession of a flint starter, and we believe that was his method for starting the fire. That eventually led to firefighters responding. At this time, we can't locate a criminal record for this individual.
Rowley is believed to be the only shooter in the ambush. He allegedly shot a total of 3 firefighters, one of whom was critically injured but is now in stable condition. The suspect was found dead at the scene. Authorities said local law enforcement have interacted with Rowley 5 times. They also shared one of his now deleted Instagram posts showing Rowley wearing camouflage, dark makeup, and a mask. Officials haven't been able to find any criminal history on him. As of now, the suspect's motive remains unknown. Kootenai County Sheriff mentioned Rowley at one time wanted to be a firefighter. Authorities are still investigating the case. Coming up, the DOJ announced what it's calling the largest healthcare fraud takedown in history. They say perpetrators stole identities from over 1 million Americans. The Justice Department today is also suing Los Angeles, saying the city isn't cooperating with federal immigration authorities. Meanwhile, new laws are about to kick in across California, tackling everything from retail theft to hidden rental fees. Christina Corona breaks down how the changes could affect California residents. And new charges to a former New York governor's aide who's accused of acting as an unregistered agent for the Chinese regime. Arlene Richards brings us details on this case when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The DOJ announced what it's calling the largest healthcare fraud takedown in history. Prosecutors say the perpetrators include doctors and foreign nationals. NTD's David Lamb reports.
On Monday, the Department of Justice said it made its largest takedown in healthcare fraud history, saving the U.S. over $14 billion in the process.
These criminals didn't just steal someone else's money. They stole from you. Every fraudulent claim, every fake billing, every kickback scheme represents money taken directly from the pockets of American taxpayers.
DOJ has charged 324 defendants with involvement in fraud schemes submitted to Medicaid, Medicare, and other healthcare programs. One organization allegedly used a network of foreign straw owners and bought medical supply companies across the U.S. Then they made fraudulent claims by exploiting the stolen identities of over 1 million Americans.
As part of this takedown, we've identified and charged defendants operating from Russia, Eastern Europe, Pakistan, and other foreign countries. These individuals have infiltrated our healthcare system to steal American taxpayer dollars.
The defendants include 96 doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and other licensed medical professionals.
What we're doing today is changing the paradigm. Not just going after bad guys and putting them behind bars, but actually getting ahead of these schemes so the money never leaves our bank account. Because by the time we find out that these criminals have stolen and the money has left the building, it's already offshore somewhere in some foreign country's vaults where foreign leaders are rejoicing in the fact they took advantage of the American people.
The DOJ said this takedown is more than twice as large as any in the past. David Lamb, NTD News.
The Justice Department is suing Los Angeles over policies limiting the city's cooperation with federal immigration authorities. A senior DOJ official commented on the lawsuit on X. Citing LA's so-called sanctuary city policy, the Post reads in part, quote, "We will keep enforcing federal immigration law in Los Angeles, whether or not the city's government or residents agree with it." The Post included a photo of a masked man on a motorbike waving a Mexican flag. The official concluded, quote, "If you don't like it, move to Mexico." The lawsuit comes weeks after President Trump deployed California National Guard troops to Los Angeles to maintain order amid deportation protests. The suit names LA Mayor Karen Bass and the president of the city council. A wave of new California laws takes effect July 1st, bringing major changes for consumers and businesses, from tighter rules on subscription renewals to tougher penalties for stolen goods. NTD's Christina Corona has the details.
A series of new laws are set to take effect in California on July 1st. Some of these laws aim to protect consumers and crack down on crime. Assembly Bill 2863 will make it easier to cancel subscriptions. Companies must now get a customer's permission to renew a paid plan after a free trial or contract ends. Senate Bill 1144 targets the sale of stolen goods on online marketplaces. Platforms like eBay and Facebook Marketplace will now be required to track high-volume sellers and adopt policies that prohibit the sale of stolen merchandise. These online marketplaces must also set up a process for consumers to report suspicious listings and alert law enforcement when they know stolen goods are being sold to California residents. Another new measure, Assembly Bill 2202, will crack down on hidden cleaning fees charged by short-term rental sites. Platforms such as Airbnb must clearly list and disclose all extra charges and penalties before booking. Senate Bill 1063 focuses on mental health by requiring all California schools serving grades 7 through 12 to print the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline number on student ID cards. The law also mandates including a QR code that links to local mental health resources. Senate Bill 1350 expands workforce safety protections to domestic workers like house cleaners and nannies who will now be covered by Cal OSHA rules. Several California cities, including Los Angeles, Pasadena, Berkeley, and San Francisco, will raise their minimum wages on July 1st. Rates will be increasing from $17.28 to $18.87 an hour in LA, from $17.50 to $18.04 in Pasadena. And San Francisco and Berkeley will both increase their minimum wage from $18.67 an hour to $19.18. Senate Bill 42 strengthens the state's CARE Act by requiring courts to provide families and caretakers with ongoing updates when someone is placed in a court-ordered mental health treatment plan. Possessing more than $950 in stolen retail goods with intent to resell is now a felony under AB 2943. Senate Bill 905 also makes it a felony to break into cars to steal items valued at $950 or more for resale. Reporting from the city of El Monte, Christina Corona, NTD News.
A former high-ranking New York State government employee, Linda Sun, and her husband pleaded not guilty today at a Brooklyn federal criminal court arraignment. The two are charged with involvement in a fraudulent scheme to steer government contracts to family businesses. She and her husband allegedly received millions of dollars, including some kickbacks. NTD's Arlene Richards was in the courtroom today.
Former New York aide Linda Sun and her husband Christopher Hu pleaded not guilty to a second superseding indictment on Monday. Both of them were initially indicted last September on various charges, including fraud. They appeared at the Eastern District of New York courthouse with their team of attorneys. Both of them are facing additional charges, including fraud, money laundering, and bribery. Sun, who previously worked for Governors Andrew Cuomo and Kathy Hochul, appeared tired and nervous Monday as she entered the courtroom. The charges on Monday relate to her work during the COVID pandemic. Under former Governor Cuomo, Sun was assigned to work on a team that was responsible for procuring contracts with vendors that would provide face masks. Sun is accused of falsifying documents to replace one or more approved vendors with vendor businesses operated by her family and friends. Her husband allegedly owns one of the vendor businesses. They both are accused of enriching themselves with millions of dollars, both directly and through kickbacks. Previously, Sun was charged with acting as an undisclosed agent of the Chinese Communist Party, while her husband allegedly facilitated the transfer of millions of dollars in kickbacks for personal gain. Sun, who worked as deputy chief of staff for Governor Kathy Hochul, allegedly used her position of influence to covertly promote CCP agendas, which prosecutors say directly threatens national security. The parties are expected to return to court on August 25th for a status conference in preparation for a November 3rd trial date. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Coming up, with a Senate vote looming, Trump's signature bill could shape the economy and the balance of power in Washington. What's at stake for both parties as the nation awaits the outcome of the Vote-A-Rama? Two political analysts join us to discuss when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. As the Senate nears a final vote on Trump's so-called big beautiful bill, both parties are sharpening their political strategies. Republicans say the stakes are nothing short of avoiding a recession and a Democratic legislative takeover in 2026. Meanwhile, the DNC just launched a nationwide push to block the GOP agenda. Joining us now to discuss the political stakes and what each side is fighting for, our political strategist, Armin Kurdian. He's a retired U.S. Navy captain and former California State Senate candidate, and Robin Byro, Democratic strategist and former Obama regional campaign director. Thank you both so much for joining us. Now, Armin, starting with you, we had debate around the bill all weekend and today's Vote-A-Rama. Where do you think Senate Republicans are on point, and where are they perhaps missing the point when it comes to what the American people actually want to see in a bill like this?
Hi, Tiffany. Ultimately, this bill is going to get passed. I think that just similar to this administration, previous administrations, we're missing a great opportunity to try to bring spending under control. I think there's been some misconceptions about some of the cuts to Medicaid and other things. For example, the work requirements that are going back in were taken out during the Biden administration, but a lot of the other opportunities to cut spending, or perhaps what some people may perceive as overly generous tax cuts, really are going to have an impact to our debt and deficit. The idea that we're going to be growing 4 to 5% per year to try to grow our way out of it, we haven't done that in a really, really long time under any president. So I think the American people would like to see spending be brought under control, because really that's what's going to help bring interest rates down.
And Robin, in your view, what do Democratic voters want to see their lawmakers do in this situation? Do you see it happening?
Honestly, what Democratic voters want to see, Tiffany, is a stop to this. They are concerned about some of the tax cuts. Now, those were just passed. The 2017 tax cuts expired. That vote just passed. So that's the thing now. But more than that, I agree with Armin. The American public at large wants to see some spending cuts. They want to see the national deficit get brought back into something that's manageable. Because right now, the per taxpayer share is $323,000 for every person who pays taxes in this country. It's unforgivably large. That's not a debt that any of us want to pass down to our children, Tiffany.
And Armin, on that note, we do see Senator Rand Paul saying it's going to increase the deficit. You also have Tom Tillis holding out. He did say he's not going to be running for re-election here. But when it comes to passing it, how confident are you that it will pass?
Ultimately, I think this bill is going to pass. It's probably going to pass by one vote. I would not be surprised if it's 50-50 with the vice president voting. And then, of course, it's got to go back to the House. And there's already some House Freedom Caucus Republicans that have said they're going to torpedo it. So it's got to go through the process again. If it doesn't, at this point of the fiscal year, if it doesn't get passed, we might actually be in a worse situation than if we're stuck with a bill that could be a lot better than it actually is. But, let's go back. We had over $8 trillion of debt added in the last administration. We're on track to maybe add another $8 trillion under this administration. We're spending $1 billion in interest debt in our current budget, which is nearly 10% of revenues that we're pulling. This is really, more than anything, is the biggest drag in our economy, because if you look at the amount of money we spend in deficit spending every year, that pretty much amounts to our GDP.
And Robin, on that note, what are you watching most closely as, the senators are voting today?
The numbers, actually. I love to look at usdebtclock.org and look at the numbers, because what Armin said is exactly true. Right now, the interest that we're paying on this is larger than what we spend every year on our national defense. The two largest things are, of course, Medicaid and Social Security, followed by the interest that we spend on our national deficit. It's wildly out of control. In fact, it's twice what it was 25 years ago in the year 2000. So when I first kind of came into my political being. So I've always been a deficit hawk. I applaud some of my Democratic colleagues who are keeping tabs on this, and some of the Republican ones as well. I actually really appreciate Senator Rand Paul for sticking to his guns on this. But look, Republicans can only afford to lose 3 votes right now. By my count, they've got 2 that are pretty much no's. And I agree with Armin. I think it's going to come down to the tie-breaking vote. But I want to say my eyes are also on one Democratic senator. That's John Fetterman. He's the wild card for me.
He has, quite a political career there, and quite a lot of changes that we've seen with him too. Armin, on that note, though, you mentioned Medicaid earlier. Now, changes to Medicaid is a point of contention, not just between Republicans and Democrats, but also within the Republican Party itself. Now, after the weekend's debates and today's Vote-A-Rama, how do you expect that issue to play out?
Let's look at, Medicaid, Medicare, and frankly, Social Security growth. The rate of growth of these programs has well exceeded inflation over the last several years. There has been no real effort to bring healthcare costs under control, because we just keep pouring more and more money into the system, and it just continues to allow money to be spent. I mean, my mother-in-law went through some procedures a couple of years ago. She goes to one hospital, they do a bunch of tests on her, they go to another hospital just a month later. They were going to do the exact same tests, which would have cost, the taxpayers several $1,000s. And then we said, hey, why are we doing this whole process all over again? I do believe that it's fair to have work requirements for people who are able-bodied and able to work, who are perhaps below the poverty level. We don't want to kick people who really need Medicaid off of the rolls or Medicare, but really lately it's been greatly expanded to people who I don't think really need it. I think there needs to be more means testing for healthcare, but at the same time, there needs to be more care done at the local hospitals to control costs, because they're complaining about, rural hospitals are going to close, or this is going to happen, or that's going to happen. Well, that's really fine. How much are you paying yourselves? How much, are you putting marble down on the floors or whatever? Where's all this money going to that's going into our healthcare system? So we've got to bring those costs under control. If we don't do that, we're going to bankrupt ourselves.
And Robin, how are you viewing the Medicaid issue?
I had an issue today with what Carolyn Levitt says about that it would not affect funding for Medicare and Medicaid. That's not what I'm seeing from the analysis that I've looked at from the CBO. So this is a tough one, and I want them to be honest and transparent about this, because we really can't afford a sick populace.
Now, Armin, as we've been talking, it's a very broad bill which could impact the country both economically and socially. For example, requiring people to work in order to get the benefits, as we were talking about, or reducing government support for things like renewable energy projects that actually could lose votes for Republicans. What is the overall strategy here?
Gosh, what is the overall strategy? I'm not sure there is a very answer to that question. If you see how it go, a lot of times it's like, well, so long as you put this in here, if you put this in here, and ultimately it's like everybody gets their money, everybody gets their spending, and that's how they continue to keep themselves in office. And everybody just they get what they want. That's a rider to the bill, whether or not they actually, they may agree with the bill to begin with, but they may pretend that they don't in order to get additional spending for their district or an additional tax break or a tax cut. It's the system that we actually have. There's very little altruism in the Senate, like Rand Paul, who just genuinely believes doing the right thing for the entire country. Obviously, if you're elected as a senator in a state, you want to do the best thing for your state. But my biggest concern for this country going forward is not some external terrorist threat. It's not cybersecurity. It's our national debt. When you look at how much we are actually spending and the interest rates that we have right now, because every year as debt expires, it's being refinanced at a higher rate. So you could even cut spending today, just it in half, and over the next several years, would probably still be going up, or at least stay flat. Rate. If we don't do anything, we're getting 0.8 trillion interest payments 8-9 years from now, and we're going to become a very debtor nation. It prevents the United States from being that it can actually be.
And Robin, the bill also calls for no tax on tips or overtime, something that Kamala Harris also pitched during the election cycle. Now there is also an extension of the tax cuts. Do you think opposing this bill so staunchly could actually alienate some Democratic or independent voters?
Tiffany, I hadn't thought of that, but you're exactly right. It definitely could. And those are people that we need to regain ground with. The Democrats have always tried to paint ourselves as the blue-collar party, the blue-collar worker. And it's going to look bad on us come the midterms if hundreds of thousands of servers across the country don't get this that was promised by both candidates. So we've got to deliver on this. I expect some concessions to be made, but I really hope that no tax on tips stays in there. And to Armin's point about the deficit spending, the way I've explained it to my children is it would be sort of like me taking out credit cards to pay bills every month. And that's just not a position that anyone wants to be in. And that's kind of how we're doing this as a country right now. And it's unsustainable.
And Robin, very shortly, looking ahead to the midterms, the DNC did just launch the organizing summer to counter the GOP ahead of key elections this year and also the 2026 midterms. Talk to us about the plan of attack here.
Right now, Tiffany, we're focused on municipal elections across the country. We've got to try and regain some momentum. So many Democrats have checked out from politics. They've literally turned off the news and turned off notifications. So we've got to try and re-engage them at a local grassroots level, because at the end of the day, all politics is local. That's what we're focused on right now.
And Armin, very quickly, how do you see Republicans countering that?
I think the Republicans are going to focus a lot on the successes they've had with the border. I think they're also going to look at perhaps, reinvigorating a Department of Defense, a greater esprit de corps within the DOD. I think that's what they're going to focus on, but also all over the country, like Robin said, a lot of local Republicans at the county level are very, very focused on those local elections, school boards, city councils, healthcare district, those kinds of things, because those are basically your feeder folks that are going to eventually move up and into other, and other races at the higher level, because you can't just necessarily jump into Congress. You need to start somewhere.
Armin Kurdi and Robin Byro, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tiffany.
My pleasure.
Coming up, a blockbuster trade in the NFL as Pittsburgh and Miami exchange star players. Dave Martin joins us with all the details when we come back. And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on right now, but let's start in the NFL as the Steelers and Dolphins swapped Pro Bowl players today in a blockbuster trade. What are the details here?
Yeah, it's a pretty big deal here, Tiff. Now, Pittsburgh is sending three-time All-Pro safety Minkah Fitzpatrick to Miami, plus a fifth-round pick. Now, Miami is turning around, and they're going to send three-time All-Pro cornerback Jalen Ramsey, plus Pro Bowl tight end Jonnu Smith, and a seventh-round pick to the Steelers in return. Now, the trade is still pending physicals, but Ramsey already confirmed today on X that he is heading to Pittsburgh. Now, this is actually somewhat of an unusual deal in the NFL. I mean, it's not normally player for player. Normally, it's just a player for a draft pick. This is definitely an unusual one. Now, also, though, this is a bit of a, this really reshapes Pittsburgh's roster this offseason. They've already brought in four-time MVP Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, as well as now Jonnu Smith and, of course, DK Metcalf, wide receiver from Seattle. They traded for him. And, of course, these two today. So quite a change for them. Now, meanwhile, for Minkah Fitzpatrick, he goes back to Miami where he started his career back in 2018. So pretty big stuff here, Tiff.
Well, looking at tennis news, Wimbledon started play today, and already we have a major upset on the men's side.
Yeah, 9th-ranked Daniel Medvedev lost to 64th-ranked Benjamin Bonzi today in 4 sets. Now, Medvedev won the U.S. Open in 2021, but he's had a tough time at the majors this year. Lost in the second round of the Australian Open back in January. Lost in the first round of the French Open just a few weeks ago, and now loses in the first round of Wimbledon today. Now, elsewhere in the first round today, 26th-ranked Stefanos Tsitsipas retired due to a back injury after losing the first 2 sets to French qualifier Valentin Royer. Now, he was ranked as third in the world at one point today. Now, apparently, though, he's had this back injury for quite a while. Let's actually listen to what he said regarding this.
It's probably the most difficult situation that I've ever been faced with, because it's an ongoing issue that doesn't seem to be disappearing or fading off as much. And myself as a person, I have a limit at some point, so I'll definitely have to have my final answer on whether I want to do stuff or not in the next couple of months. This is going to be hard, but if I see it going in that trajectory, there's no point at competing. I mean, if I'm not healthy, and I've talked about health so many times, if health is not there, then your whole tennis life becomes miserable.
So Tsitsipas obviously looking frustrated there. Now, one player who avoided the injury bug, or the upset bug today, really, second-ranked Carlos Alcaraz, who has won the last 2 Wimbledon championships. He won in 5 sets today over Fabio Fognini. Now, Alcaraz last year in winning Wimbledon lost just 5 sets the entire time. He lost 2 sets today. I mean, this is a 5-set match there. So upsets going on here at Wimbledon already.
Lot to watch for there. While moving to NBA news, Ace Bailey, Utah's first-round pick last week, reported to the team yesterday without holding out or requesting a trade. Why is this such a big deal?
Yeah, I mean, no one really knew what to expect in this case. Now, to review, Bailey was taken 5th overall last week by Utah in the first round. This was a big-time prospect, but he declined private invitations to the teams that were picking 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and Utah was 5th. Now, usually that's a sign that the player does not want to go there. Of course, players don't really choose where they get to be drafted, of course. Now, he and his agents did not actually say why that they didn't actually want to do that. So anyway, Utah selected him. And I think we were all ready to see what was going to happen. Now, Utah also selected Walter Clayton Jr. that same night. The very next day, Thursday, Clayton flew out to Utah. Bailey did not, so that kind of made us wonder what was actually going to happen there. But yesterday, Bailey visited, said he was blessed to be in the position he's in. Now, if you followed Bailey at all, Rutgers, very talented player. He's about 6'8", 6'9", guard, forward, kind of wing player. Very good shooter, very good rebounder, very talented player. Of course, in today's NBA, players do not, of course, have that leverage to decide where they get picked. Really, if he's going to decide anywhere, you have to wait till you get to unrestricted free agency, which is about 5 years into the league. But this could have been quite a story had this continued on. I'm not sure what leverage he really had here. So it was a story. It looks like it's a non-story now, though. Just so you know, all right? That's the story.
All right, well, thanks for the non-story. As always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. Around the clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.